Okay, sorry, I'm getting things a little. All right, so here we go, starting. Right, we're going to take just a little deviation from the normal flight plan of looking at Chronicles here and look a little bit at Isaiah, because Isaiah started his ministry at the end of Uzziah's reign. And so we have been talking about Uzziah for the last couple of weeks, looking at his life and looking at what he did. And so he did some very, very good things in terms of the economy, in terms of building up the military and that kind of stuff. And the big lesson that we learned from him was, as long as he sought the Lord, God made him to prosper. So it was a good, solid lesson there. And we looked at the places of that he conquered, which was Gath and Jebna and Ashdod, and what those represented. But toward the end of his reign, probably about 10 years before he died, likely, he then did something that was very untoward, went into the temple and he sought to burn incense, which was not for kings to do, that was for the priests to do in terms of worship. And Uzziah then got leprosy as a result, and that was a judgment of God. And so Uzziah ended up then being isolated in his own house for really the last 10 years of his reign. So his son, Jotham, then took over as a co-regent. So he took over the day-to-day operations of reigning the kingdom. But the people were acting corruptly and doing a lot of the old, same old, as had been going on for the last lot of decades. So we're going to go and look at Isaiah, because Isaiah started his ministry. A lot of people sort of think that he was called by God at the age of 17 or so pretty early on in his career. And as it says in the beginning of the book of Isaiah, it says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So Isaiah had a long prophetic career spanning these four kings. Now, tradition has it that Isaiah then was martyred in the reign of Manasseh, because Manasseh would have been the son of Hezekiah. Manasseh was a very evil, bad piece of work, and tradition has it that Isaiah was sawn in two, and that's how his life came to an end. So, and that was just because of the evilness of Manasseh. So now that's not recorded in scripture as such, but there is a mentioning in Hebrews chapter 11 that talks about people of faith, and it says, and some were sawn in two. So, and they think that's a kind of a veiled reference to Isaiah's martyrdom. So, so tradition has it that that's how Isaiah died. So, but Isaiah chapter 6 has this, it's a relatively short chapter, but it's a very, very significant chapter in terms of the call of the prophet Isaiah. And, or as you all would say in this part of the country, Isaiah or something like that. I just say Isaiah. Okay. So, and it's in the year that King Uzziah died. Okay, so that's why I have that title up there. Okay, so now I want to, before putting the scriptures out there, I just wanted to sort of break this down into a bit of a an outline, first of all. So, so the first four verses have to do with the vision of God. This is what Isaiah sees. And the next one is then the understanding of himself in terms of Isaiah, which is in verse 5. There is then the provision of the remedy, which is in verse 6 and 7. There is the call then of Isaiah in verse 8. And then lastly, there is the message in verse 9 to 13. So, and the structure of this is very, very significant. You know, one comes after another, but it's very specifically laid out that way. So so as we chop through it, I think things will start to make a bit of sense. Okay, so the first thing that was talked about basically is the vision of God. Now let's look at these first few verses. So it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and above it stood seraphim, or should be pronounced seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So so this is these first 4 verses. And so what we want to do is we want to look at the contents of this and see what we can get out of it. But if you can imagine that Isaiah being a teenager here, like a 17-year-old who has been brought up in probably a religious environment, but there's a disparity between what is being kind of put out there in the public domain and what's actually happening. You know, so I would say that you know, because we'll learn about Jotham next week, which was Uzziah's son. He wasn't a bad guy, but he was kind of hands off when it came to, you know, really promoting spiritual well-being amongst his people. So he himself was okay. You know, Uzziah was an okay guy, but you know, he went out and did something very untoward, and so people then knew about that, saw the judgment of God, but kind of went, well, sure, whatever, you know. So there was a lot of apathy that was, you know, out there in the reality of the world. So so Isaiah was growing up in this environment, and and there's probably a lot of uncertainty, especially when Uzziah then actually dies. So let's look at this a little bit here. So the time is in 740 BC when King Uzziah died. Okay, so you know, this is a very, very important sort of statement because it gives you the time of when things take place. And now Uzziah reigned for a long time. Does anybody remember how long he reigned? More than that. It was 52. It was 52 years. So now a lot of that reign was in tandem with Amaziah, which would have been his father. There was quite a bit of overlap there in terms of the co-regency. And then Uzziah had, you know, a fair amount of reign on his own. And then the last 10 years or so, you know, Jotham would have been co-reigning with him because Uzziah was in a house on his own because of his leprosy. So, but still, you know, when people know that the king is about, you know, it's that, you know, you kind of know what the lay of the land is. But then when you hear the king dies, then there is this political uncertainty. So I don't know if there's too many people here that remember King George. Does anybody remember back?
Well, I was alive when he died, but I don't remember it.
Right. Okay. So you know, yeah. So we're looking at Pelly here, going. No.
My dad was called George. That's all I know.
Oh. So anyway, so really, there's nobody in the room, and I don't really think anybody online as such would remember, you know, Elizabeth's father, Queen Elizabeth's father. So, so what we have always understood, at least within this context. I have to be politically sort of careful here, but is the reign of Queen Elizabeth. So now she's 95 years old, probably not too far away from, hitting. Well, not sure if I'd put it in those terms, but anyway, as they say here, pop their clogs or whatever, so, that sounds terrible, but anyway, so, and we're used to how she sort of is, and now I know that the Queen doesn't have any, political sort of, input as such, but I think when Charles takes over, if indeed that's what's going to happen, it's going to make, there's going to be a lot of questions. Is this going to be a lot? How's this going to work? Because, Queen Elizabeth seems to be pretty stable, at least in her morality and her, her promotion of godly principle and that kind of thing. I know her family is like, are all nuts, but anyway, so I'm an American. I can get away with this. So anyway, we don't have kings. That's why we thumbed our nose at them back in 1776. So
You've got one.
huh?
You've got one.
All
right.
Harry. Oh, yeah, him over there. Yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, so so what is really needed at this particular time is who is in charge. King Uzziah is dead. His son is now taking his place on his own. So what's that going to look like? So Isaiah, as a 17-year-old, then needs to know who is in charge. So, Jotham's in charge as the new king, but who's really in charge? Right. God.
Yeah.
So, okay. So he then gets this vision of God. Okay. So the vision of God here is that in this year the King Uzziah died, he says he saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and so on and so forth. So he sees something that he has never ever seen before in his life, and it absolutely blows his socks off. So he sees the Lord. Now it's interesting. Now the word for Lord here is in lowercase. It is capital L, lower O, lower R, lower D, not all capitals. Because when you see all capitals in the Old Testament, that is the personal covenant name of God, which people might pronounce as Yahweh or Jehovah, and that was the name that was revealed to Moses at the burning bush. Okay, so that in a sense that is God's personal name. But here we're seeing this word Lord, which is the Hebrew word Adonai, which basically is the one who is supreme. This is the master. This is a word that talks about God really being overarchingly in charge. So this is what Isaiah needs to see. He needs to see the supremacy of God. So because he's seeing kings come and go and all that kind of thing, but he needs to see really something about God that is really, really huge. And he also sees God sitting on a throne. And so Isaiah may have saw thrones, or at least the king in court or something like this, and they would sit on thrones. I remember going down to Dublin Castle one time, and there is the throne room that is in Dublin Castle, where monarchs of British monarchs of old would have sat and held audiences and that kind of stuff. And you can actually go and sit on the throne and say, well, Queen Victoria sat here. It's kind of like one of those things in America where they say George Washington was here. They always have these signs up and down the East Coast, just to try to promote some kind of fame. He may have just stopped there for a couple of minutes to use the loo or something. But you know, this stuff, you know, well, George he was here. You know, happy days. So, but this throne is a much bigger throne. This is a throne that God is sitting on, and so it is a demonstration of one who rules and rules supreme. It is also high and lifted up. So he is the one who is above all things. Now, when I looked at the wording here about this throne that is high and lifted up, there cannot be anything higher than this. This is as high as you can possibly go. So there is a word in astronomy that talks about the highest point in heaven, and in terms of stars and that kind of thing, and that is what is referred to as the zenith. And the zenith is as far sort of north as you can go. If you look in the night sky and you look at what's referred to as the North Star, or the Polaris star, or the pole star, you know, everything revolves around that star in terms of if you were to take a camera and hold the shutter open for some number of minutes, you would see the stars sort of starting to streak around, and everything sort of revolves around that. Now, the only reason that happens is because the Earth is rotating, and so that makes you think that the stars are moving in a sense. But that's the zenith. Okay, that is the top. That's the very top of the heavens. And so you cannot get, well, you probably in astronomical terms, you could get higher, but in terms of this, you can't get any higher. So, so we have, you know, the one who is supreme, the one who rules, and the one who is above all things. So this is what Isaiah is seeing. And then the train of his robe filled this temple. I was looking at pictures of this. You know, if you Google, you know, Isaiah's vision of God, you know, on Google, and then go and click on images, you end up getting, you know, all kinds of strange and wonderful things. And I thought, well, we'll stick one of those in. But the problem with then going and getting an artist's rendering of this is then it does fall short of what it actually is. So I thought, no, we'll dismiss that. We'll just stay with the words. We'll just stay with what God says. So now, the train of his robe filling the temple. A train is the part of the robe, or the majestic coat that a king would wear that trails behind them. So if anybody's ever seen, you know, old pictures of when Queen Elizabeth was crowned, or when she opens Parliament or does these kinds of things, you know, there's a big, long doofer train that goes behind her, and there's usually some, I don't know what those guys are called, that sort of carry the thing, you know, carry the train behind her or whatever. But, you know, the longer it is, the more majesty they have. Now, this train here filled the temple. So this is huger than huge here. So and so this talks about the one who has exceeding majesty. So so this is a huge image that Isaiah is seeing as a teenager here. This one who is supreme, this one who rules, this one who's above all things, this one who has exceeding majesty. I mean, this is just, you know, completely and utterly mind-blowing in terms of visually what he is seeing. So, and then there's this compacted within this is then this vision of angels, which are the seraphim, which literally means burning ones. Now, there's two types of angels that are talked about in the Bible. There is seraphim and there is cherubim. they have different sort of occupations in terms of, whether they go out and they share messages, or they act in some sort of service, or they're acting in the worship of God and that kind of thing. Seraphim in this particular instance are surrounding the throne of God, and so what they are doing is they are affording protection, in a sense, of that throne. So
worship too.
yes, and we'll see that in 2 seconds here. So so it talks about how many wings they have. Now these are very, very strange looking creatures. Okay, so and the angels are created beings. They have a mind. They have the ability to choose. They have great power, as we would see angels. I always marvel at the story of in Hezekiah later on, where one angel goes out and slays 185,000 soldiers of the Syrian army. So Putin's met his match, so in those terms. But so angels have extraordinary power, and that is afforded to them by God. But there's one big difference between man and angels, and that is man can be redeemed. Angels cannot. So, because Christ didn't die for angels. See, when certain angels, a third of the angels out of heaven, decided to follow Lucifer and his crack and go down that road, they bought the farm, and there was no comeback for that.
The angels don't die.
That would be true. Yeah, well, they're going to end up either judged or continuing on. Yeah,
Well, Lucifer has not hope.
yeah, yes, they're all.
But the angels in heaven are eternal, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, there's no indication that they die or have a limited lifespan of some sort.
So I was just listening to tape, and they don't sing.
That's right.
Any redemption songs or redeemed?
Well, it's interesting when you read about angels, communicating with man or worshiping God or something like that. There is nothing in the Bible that says that they sing. Now we're like if you go to the birth of Christ, when the angels appeared to the shepherds and all that kind of thing, we talk about the choirs of angels.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that. It says that there was a host of angels and they said. If you go into Revelation, it talks about what angels said. There's nothing about angels singing anything. So I don't believe angels actually have a gift of music or oh, I know, we see all that kind of thing, but there's nothing in the scriptures that actually suggests that.
The musical kind of.
Well, again, what we do, he would have been in charge of worship and that kind of thing, and we end up equating worship with music.
Yeah.
But that's within our remit, not theirs. Okay, so I believe that God has actually given us an ability to actually sing. And
That's a gift, isn't it?
yeah. So
I definitely sound like an angel when I got mine, so that's before I knew that I could.
Yes, we'll keep that in mind. Okay. So anyway, so they had 3 pairs of wings. So they had 6 wings in total. So 2 wings, they covered their face, and that had to do with worship in the sense that they would not gaze at God's glory.
Yeah.
Because, nothing created can fully expose themselves to God's glory and survive. As God said to Moses, no man can see my face and live.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure when even the prophets just fell of fear, when they seen them, well, they thought the same God was an angel.
yeah.
But back to glory.
Yeah, yes. Yes, and even Moses, when he came down the mountain, his face was shown, and so they had to go and throw a cover on him because it was too bright.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
but so, and then there was 2 wings that they covered their feet, that has to do with worship, but there they're acknowledging their own lowliness. So they're in a very, very humble and low state. So
And we are lower than that.
yeah. Mhm. So and then with 2 of the wings provided flight, which had to do with service. Okay, so it wasn't until I sort of read out of John MacArthur, one of John MacArthur's books, about the dividing up of these different things. It's like you read about there's 2 they covered their face, 2 they covered their feet, and there's 2 that did fly, and you're like, right, okay, I can understand the service and the worship bit, but why is there 2 bits that have to do with the worship, and what's so then I read this and it's like, okay, one's about not looking at God's glory, and the other is about their own humility.
And it's 2 different.
Yeah, and they're very different things.
Yeah.
So this is the vision that Isaiah has of God. Now we'll have to then go to what the angels then say. Okay, so continue on.
Can I just ask quickly?
Yeah.
Was that vision was Daniel too? Remember when Daniel visions, was that kind of the same vision? Because I know it was like, I don't know, it was animals, wasn't it? And actually,
Yeah, yes, yeah, that was a very, very different sort of idea, yeah, but anyway. So what the angels then do is they give a proclamation, okay, meaning that they say something. And so the thing that they say is holy, holy, holy. All right. Now, in Hebrew, that is what is referred to as a superlative. Okay. Now, a superlative is in our language, okay, because sometimes when you see something that is in a different language, you have to then make up for it in our own language so that you can understand it. Now, when we talk about a superlative, we're talking about the highest end of a description of a thing. So let me give you an example. If you talk about something that is good, it's at a certain level. Then there is better, which is like here, and then there is best. Okay, best is the superlative. So that is the highest end of that gradation of good. So, good's down at the bottom, better is in the middle, and then best is at the top. So if one was talking about something that was holy, that was like good. Okay, if something was holy, holy, that was like better. And if it was holy, 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 it was the best. Okay, so that was the top end. So, and there's very, very few things that are described in the Bible using 3 words in a row like that in terms of the superlative. So here the angels are proclaiming that God is on the highest tier of holiness, and holiness is about being completely and utterly separated from man and his sin. So, God's purity is out of range. It is the zenith. God's goodness is out of range. God's, everything about God is infinite. You can't fathom, what it is. So, but this is what the angels are proclaiming, and they have to proclaim this particular thing about being holy, because what they're demonstrating before Isaiah is that he is completely and utterly separated from man and his sin. So, so this is huge, and so it's getting bigger and bigger. We see the Lord high and lifted up, sitting on a throne, and all those kinds of things, and those are all big and massive things. And then the angels come out and say, "Holy, holy, holy." So
when you understand that, then you start to understand what really Jesus Christ did on the cross.
Yes, yeah. So, you know, and if you remember when we talked about the word holy, it was the Hebrew word kadosh, which had to do with the separation between the chaff and the wheat. You know, if you were going through and separating the wheat, you know, you stuck your fork in it and you threw it up, and then the wind blew the chaff away, and then you had the grain that was left. And so it was about separation. So the literal word kadosh actually meant the way of the teeth, or the way of the fork. You know, it was to stab the fork in the thing and, you know, and throw it up in the air. And so, you know, God is then separated. You know, he is the best. That's what's left. You know, you know, he's not associated with chaff and uselessness and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So and I think
like the wind, you know, the way part of the nation, wind blew separate.
yeah, when you throw it up in the air, the wind, you know, took away what that which was useless. Yeah. So and I think the last time we talked about this word was what was it, the threshing floor of Ronan or something like this, back when David was picking a place for the temple and in Jerusalem, and it was the threshing floor that was basically holy, you know, because there was the threshing that was going on at that place. So, and then the other thing that's proclaimed is that the whole earth is full of his glory. And so it really is a statement about how God is really in everything, you know, even down to the molecular structures, you know, that, you know, that the sheer power that actually holds atoms together, people still don't understand this, you know, because it should just blow apart, you know. So because you have a nucleus in an atom, which is full of positive material called protons and neutrons, and around the atom then orbits these things called electrons, and electrons have a negative charge. Now, really, by right, the thing should collapse in on itself, but it doesn't. And it is maintained, but it stays together. You know, and they've actually looked into, well, what holds the protons together? Because the protons, which is all positive material, really, because you have a positive thing, you know when you have a magnet, you know, and you have a positive magnet here and a positive magnet here, you know, do you ever, as a kid, kind of try to push them together and they don't quite, you know, they're repelling, but you have this material that should blow apart, but it sticks together inside. So they refer to it as atomic glue. What is it? Muons and neuron, or, you know, some type bomb things, you know. So, you know, people that get into quantum mechanics and all that kind of stuff, you know, they you know, have actually discovered that there are even smaller particles than these things that all, you know, hold this stuff together. And they, you know, and they can describe it, but in terms of actually how it works, they're going, beats me.
That's why they use witchcraft. You know, that's why witches seem to be involved in quantum mechanics, because they feel they've got the next answer.
Oh, right.
It only seems to be, yeah, I've got a friend that doubled and all that stuff. So all stuff. It's just because they can't understand.
Well, yeah, and then they try to come up with all kinds of strange, wonderful reasons why, and so on. You know, I mean, you know, quantum mechanics exists. You know, it's all part of physics and all that kind of stuff. But you know, and you know, certain elements have certain properties, and that's why we did talk about salts and alkalis and acids and all those kinds of things when we were talking back in the days of discussing what was it? Yeah, it was back in Sermon on the Mount stuff. But anyway, so so, you know, so God's glory is seen in the very, very basic elements of creation, and is also seen in the vastness of creation. So, you know, so when we're saying that the whole earth is full of his glory, so it is, you know. So so this is what they're proclaiming. So, you know, we're just seeing this huge vision of God, you know. So
But that was a statement for Isaiah, wasn't it? Because
Yes,
later on, he can look back and he probably didn't understand it at 17,
uh-huh.
or when he got.
But this
walking.
really was then the basis
Yeah.
of why he did what he did, you know,
Yeah.
so the impact of this vision then, was that the place was shaken. Now, usually when things are shaken, you know something's happening. So to me, this is, attention is secured, you know, so anytime that you are sitting in your house and you feel like a big rumble or something like that, you know, you go, what was that? You know, you look out the window and maybe it was a big lorry that went past or something like this. But you know, shaking causes you to get attention, or, you know, secures your attention. And then it says the place was filled with smoke. So the glory of God cannot be understood by man, or it is obscured because man can't handle it. You know, so it's, you know, something occurs there where, you know, it, again, like God said to Moses, if you see my face, you cannot live. So there's an obscurity there that takes place, because actually God is being merciful because he knows you can't go.
Sorry, what we like, I know it's going back into the realms of science lesson again, but for me, from my understanding of physics, it's just our perception of the world around us rather than maybe how it actually is. So,
Well, that could be. You know, physics generally is quite a is a lot more sort of predictable than say chemistry, and then because there's certain things within chemistry that sort of break the rules, and then if you look at biology, which is the other big science, then there's more stuff that sort of breaks the rules there, you know. So but you know, when you look at things like physics, you go, you know, yeah, why it's sort of, it's an observation. It's, you know, it's derived from empirical, you know, observation, not in terms of why it works. You don't always come to the right conclusions, you know, and this is what man's trying to find, is dark matter and dark energy and all that crap, you know, up in space. So because there's certain things that occur and they just go, but there needs to be something else or something. There's, you know,
Something else, you know. That's something else.
Yeah.
But Stu, a question, right?
Right.
What if we can't see God, you know, stated, Adam and Eve made God, and Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden.
Yeah.
Did they see God, or was it just an image of God? Or I don't get that.
This is yeah, you can only go by what the Bible says, you know, that they heard God walking in the garden in the cool of the day.
Okay.
So
they didn't see him, they just heard him. And they heard his voice.
Yeah.
There is voice, and
Yeah. So
forbidden food, it should surely die.
yeah.
Yes.
So
You know,
but you know, in terms of their fellowship with God, they, you know, God was there, but we have to realize that what Jesus Christ says about God the Father is that God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth.
Maybe because at that stage they were sinless to see them.
Well, this is true. Yeah. So they this was before they fell, so they would have had a very untainted view of God and understanding of God. So now what that
Do you think the same God?
I think the same God and the sinless
yeah.
part of them, I think.
And
They
I
want to have
think
fellowship with God.
why would they hide?
Exactly.
Well, they
You
hid,
know,
well they hid because
you
they
don't know.
well, they hid because they sinned.
Yeah.
So
You know,
but yeah, so obviously prior to sin, they would have been able to see, hear, and completely fathom God in that sense.
That's my point. So
And
think
have
about
fellowship
it.
with him.
Yeah.
If they hadn't did what they did, what would the world be right now? It'd be amazing.
Oh, yes, it would be, absolutely.
but that's our fault too.
Yeah, but well, anyway, they sinned, it all gets perpetuated. Yeah. So yeah, well, we can blame them, but we need to blame ourselves. But anyway, so anyway, so we have then this impact of vision. Okay, so this is all about the vision of God. Okay, now we move on then to the understanding of self. Okay, because we have this grand image of God, which is the zenith. Okay, it's the top. It's the can't go any higher. It's way out there, way up there. So now we are talking about the complete and polar opposite of God, which is Isaiah himself. So that is what's referred to in astronomical terms as the nadir. Okay, some of you may have heard the word zenith, but probably less of you have heard the word nadir, N-A-D-A-R. So, but anyway, so let's look at what is said in verse 5 here. So it says, so I said, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now here, the word Lord is all capitals, so he is understanding that he is seeing not only the supreme God, but he is seeing the personal God who has a covenant with Israel. So that's God's personal name. That is the word that's used over 6,800 times within the Old Testament.
So, what names used?
That word Lord, that is all capitals, yeah. So, okay. Now, let's break this down a little bit, this particular section. So, oops. Oh, well, I meant to have that come in one by one, but sometimes I miss it. But anyway, so the first thing that he says is, I am undone. In other words, I am destroyed. Okay. So, which is, he realizes that, and I'm using the word I here because this is really statements that we need to make about ourselves. Okay, where he's saying, you know, I am the complete and utter opposite of God. You know, God is high, God is holy, God is in charge, God is everything that I ain't. You know, so he's realizing this when he says, woe is me, for I am undone. It means I am destroyed. You know, there's nothing left of me. And so then he talks about, you know, I'm a man of unclean lips. So what that does is say my speech then reveals the contents of my heart, which is foul, vulgar, and common. Okay, so you know, as Proverbs says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So so you know, what is in you comes out of your mouth. So for verse 5, this is all. So so this is the part where he says, you know, I am a man of unclean lips. So woe is me, for I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips. So, and then what he says, I dwell amongst the people of unclean lips. So so we say, you know, I dwell amongst and am informed by people that are like me. You know, so so he's acknowledging that, you know, he is a product too of his environment. So and why does he get this? Why does he say I'm destroyed? Why does he talk about his speech? Why is he talking about where he dwells and how he's informed and all this kind of stuff? Well, because he had a revelation of God. Well, I mean, the spirit of God, yes, is revealing this to him, but you know, he sees this very, very practically and physically. So now, where he then goes with this is he then basically we say, you know, I truly understand myself then in the light of who God is. So because it and the last statement there is you cannot understand your own position until you understand the absolute position of God himself. So, you know, it's like you know, being on a, you know, in the middle of the sea or something like that. And if you have no reference point, you have no idea where you are. And some people I've talked to that have dove into water when it's dark and you're in the water, sometimes you get very disoriented in terms of what's up and what's down. And sometimes people then swim down thinking that they're going up. And you know, because there's a, you have no point of reference. You have no point of understanding where you are so that you can then move. So now, if you're in the middle of the sea, you know, this is why they get all excited, you know, that they see land, you know, and then you can focus in on something that is of an absolute position. That's why, you know, lighthouses and things like that were so important in early seafaring and that kind of stuff. And, you know, when seafarers were in the middle of the ocean, what did they use as their absolute reference point? Well, no, if they're in the middle of the sea, use the stars. So now the sun was of some reference point, obviously, because they sort of knew, okay, the sun rises in the east and goes down in the west and all that kind of stuff. But when they got their the thing called a sextant out, which was a thing that they used the stars to, you know, reference, you know, where their position was. Well, they did it all in relation to where the North Star was. So the North Star didn't change position. Never does. It's there. You know, if you go out tonight and you find the North Star, which is at the end of what we call the Little Dipper or the little, what do you all call it? You know, it's, you know, the Big Bear and the Little Bear and, you know, all them sort of constellations.
Right.
Yeah, it's the little plow. Let's see, the big, yeah, sometimes you call it the plow. There's the big plow and the small plow, but if you follow the two end stars off of the big plow or the Big Dipper, then you will then find it'll go straight to the North Star. So it's not a particularly bright star, but it's there in the night sky. So, you know, and all the stars all revolve around that. So if you're out in the middle of the sea, you know, where there's not a whole lot of light pollution, you know, so there's not going to be a street lamp that's going to cause a jip. You know, there's going to be, you know, you'll look over there and go, right, okay, constellations, boom, boom, yes, there we go. There's the North Star. So then you will know, and then you use things like compasses. Okay, how's a compass work? Well, yeah, but it uses magnetism that points absolutely to a particular direction. You know, so could you imagine if your compass sort of did whatever it wanted to? You know, it's like, well, I think the north might be over there. Maybe it's over here. Now, it has happened in the past where the polarity of the Earth actually swapped one time. So, you know, the north all of a sudden went to the south and the south went to the north. That was a bit confusing for that particular year.
The SS Great Britain crashed in Dundrum Bay. The captain thought he'd have the airman.
Right.
He designed the ship, instantly knew what had gone wrong. He had put the compass on a metal plate. He hadn't put wood.
Oh dear. Yeah. I remember actually making a compass one time, and I magnetized the end of the nail, and I put it on a piece of polystyrene and floated it in water.
Yeah,
and it just looked, just pointing straight to north. Yeah. Yes. So, but yeah, if you put it on iron, that's the problem. It's either iron or steel. That'll completely wreck it.
I've seen idiots out with compasses on the mountains. The compasses sitting on the metal gate.
Yeah, useless. So.
So
I don't know the answer to that question that you're asking. So I don't know. But so what Isaiah is saying here is he is seeing the absolute position of God. That God does not change. You know, God doesn't vacillate and Mickey Mouse around like we do. You know, he is in an absolute position. So he then sees himself and sees himself properly because he knows what the absolute position of God is. So God is holy. God is completely separate from sin. He then sees himself as sinful. So he understands that there is a positional issue there. So now this lasts for a verse, okay, in terms of understanding oneself. Now, if the story ends at verse 5, we have a big problem, you know, because God's up there as far as you can go, and Isaiah is down there as far as he can go. And there's a big distance between the two. So now let's talk about the provision then of the remedy. So this is Isaiah 6:6-7. So then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. So the remedy lasts for 2 verses here, but there's an awful lot that's in these verses. So let's see what we can discover. So sin is the thing that produces this gulf between God and man. Okay. Sin produces conflict between God and man. And sin produces estrangement between God and man. In other words, that there is a relationship problem. So, so there's a variety of things that sin does. Sin produces distance. Sin produces conflict. Sin produces a problem with relationship. So, and that needs to be addressed, and man cannot address it other than to acknowledge it. So that's what Isaiah does. He acknowledges that there's a problem here, because he says, I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips. I dwell amongst the people of unclean lips. You know, he understands that from the heart comes bad stuff. So, and that's where we need to be. You know, as we go. I understand this now, but at the same time, you can't do anything about it. This is where God then steps in and does something about it. So cleansing from sin involves pain and removal to provide change, because this coal, this live coal that's taken from the altar with tongs, demonstrates, you know, anybody ever touched a live coal out of a fire, or one landed? Okay, so is it nice? No, it's you know, it hurts. Okay, but at the same time, this coal is for the purification of yourself. It is for the removal, as we say here, to provide then change, so that the distance and the conflict and the estrangement can be addressed.
Quite interesting to put like purging and all in the first part of it, because then with Jesus Christ being purged, you know, the way it's stated, like the purging. I just find that interesting.
Yeah. So sin is then cleansed or purged, okay, and is taken away, not just covered. Okay, what happens with Old Testament sacrifices is that your sin is only covered. It's not taken away. This is a big revelation to Isaiah here, because his experience as a teenager with sacrifices and all that kind of stuff is year after year after year. You go to the priest and tell the priest your sins, and you know, gets dealt with on the Day of Atonement, and they go and put their hands on the goat, and they take the goat out, you know, and by the hand of a suitable man, and he takes it out of the city and lets it go, and you know, and it's all this procedure, but that only lasts a year. And then you got to do it again. So sin's never, in the Old Testament, sin is never completely dealt with.
It's very much like being Catholic.
Yeah,
You go
sure.
dash your sins, you do your penance, and then you go back and do the same thing.
Yeah, sure. You know, so the Catholic system is very Old Testament like. Yeah, you know, because what do they call their officiants? Priests.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, the only priest that we need in the New Testament times is the great high priest, who is Jesus Christ himself. There's one mediator, and there's one God and one mediator between God and man, and that is the man Christ Jesus. So we don't need a priest.
usually tell my mom.
I know. So sin is cleansed, taken away, not just covered. So this kind of language that Isaiah is hearing from the angel is extraordinary language. My sin is actually taken away. That's unreal. That's just mind-boggling to him. Because you don't see that kind of language in the Old Testament. Here, that means, so this is very, very big. So iniquity, okay, so because there's two things here that it says your iniquity is taken away, your sin purged. Now, different Bible translations use sort of different words. We'll stick with the New King James here because I just find that easier. But iniquity refers to distortion and twisted thinking and behavior and guilt. So, when you're guilty about something, you really don't know where to go with it. Guilt is, as my father has said in the past here, guilt is how we manage the past, and worry is how we manage the future. So, but the problem is with guilt is it's like going into a cave, which is big and black, and there's no outlet. Whereas what God provides is not just guilt. He provides conviction, which says, yes, you've done wrong, but guess what? I have a remedy. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So, but iniquity talks about distortion. It talks about twistedness, twisted thinking, twisted behavior, and you're just all a mess. Sin, on the other hand, refers to missing the mark, which is the same in Greek in the New Testament, and it is the neglection of God's law. So sin is an act of omission. Basically, you're what you should have been doing, you're not doing. It says in the book of
So
James.
what's a practical thing? The sin is like, we're not.
Say, if I was God and I told you to go and do something, and you say, no.
It's a willful thing.
Yeah, I guess. So you're willfully neglecting to do what God wants you to do, whereas transgression, on the other hand, is willfully doing something you shouldn't do. So that's an act of commission as opposed to an act of omission. So
Inequities.
inequity is it's just a confused, distorted state of understanding, of where you are. So, and certainly Isaiah's iniquity has been, as it says, taken away because he sees who God is and he sees who he is. So there's no confusion here.
I mean, if you were reading that, if I was reading that, I'd put in sin, inequity and transgression, all just a sin, this is all sin, but.
But there's different nuances of it. Yeah, there's different angles of it. Yeah. So
there's a whole new.
yeah. See, the Old Testament uses four main words for sin. There's transgression, there's iniquity, and there's rebellion. Okay. So rebellion again is a very willful term against God. You're against God. I rebel against God. And the word rebel, if I remember in the Bible properly in the Hebrew, it talks about literally means a chaos man, and so I think it's the word mar. Yeah, because it has to do with bitterness. It's associated with bitterness, and the extension of that is because you're bitter in your mind. You're chaotic in your thinking, and so therefore you rebel against God.
Makes so much sense.
So
See it all around us.
yeah, oh sure, yeah. So this is why it's so important then to have a vision of God and understand yourself, and then to get the what the provision of the remedy is. Right. So not much farther here. Okay, now we have the call of Isaiah, which is only a verse. Which is also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. Right. So now he is hearing the voice of the Lord there. Notice that is lowercase letters. So that's not the covenant name of God. That is the supremacy of God, is what that's about. So he is hearing the voice of the supreme Lord. And also Adonai can be translated my Lord. So it is a very personal name to you. So, so he is hearing the voice of his Lord. This is not somebody else's God. This is not, the Assyrians' God or the Babylonians' God or something like this. This is his Lord, So, so then the Lord is making issuing this question, which is, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Now, some people would look at the us and sort of say, okay, well, does that talk about the Trinity of God? Meaning God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, maybe. But I think it's talking more about the fullness of God. So,
Obviously God knew, he would say that answer.
oh, sure, yeah.
So it was like he knew the question on the answer.
Well, yeah, but yes, God knows all things in regard to that, but God goes through this process, and because, God could have said, right, Isaiah, I'm not going to ask this question. I'm just, let's go, so there, because there is an idea of man's responsibility here. So, because probably, this is a free will question. Okay, so then what does he say? Here am I, send me. Now, have we heard the message yet? Have we heard the instruction yet?
No.
Nope. We've had a vision of God. We've had an understanding of self. We've seen the provision of the remedy. We have the call, but we don't have the instruction yet. So this is very interesting that he says, yep, hands up, I'm going. Where are you going to? I don't know.
That's faith then.
So Isaiah responds to the call before hearing the message because he understands the perfection of God. God has solved the problem between him and Isaiah, and the only rational and reasonable response is to accept the call no matter what the message is. I sat with a guy recently, and he said to me, I don't understand why Jesus died. And I was able to share with him very simply why Christ died. And the guy just descended into a flood of tears. Because then he understood. And it was a real joy to be able to sit and experience that with him, And because to me, I have the best occupation in the world, because to be able to share God's truth, there is nothing like it. There's nothing better.
It's the satisfaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knows we get it.
Yes, and it's not just. I used to be in, computer science and all that kind of stuff. And you tell somebody, you show them programming or show them things like, this is how this works. Oh, okay, great. There's a bit of a revelation there, but that's only temporary. You see, when you tell something, like this, you've told them something eternal. And
that's only the ground level.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and so God has more and more things for you. So, but I think this is very important, getting this lineage of information. You see God first, you see yourself, you see God's remedy, and then basically you just throw your hand up and say, right, I'm going, because this is the only rational and reasonable response. It's the only thing that makes any sense. I mean, could you imagine if Isaiah says, you know, I'm more concerned about my family and, you know, my work and, you know, I need to make a couple of pounds. So maybe later. I mean, you know, if I saw this vision of God and I understood the vision of myself, really, again, the only reasonable thing to do, the only rational thing to do is to do what he did. So
The thing which says, I heard the voice,
yeah,
you know, like that's,
yeah.
if we, you know, were so sure,
Mhm.
you know, that God was talking, I heard the voice and the realization that God was speaking to you.
Mhm. Yeah,
But you can hear it and it can be so strong, you can't, you know it's from God.
So another level, you know, what I mean, it's just,
well, you know, and this is why it's so important to read God's word, is because then God has an opportunity to then lift the words off the page. You know, I remember when God called me into the work of stars. It was in January of '98. Yeah, and I was just doing my normal readings through the Bible, and I was reading Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 6, where God then was speaking to the Israelites, and he says, "You've spent enough time around this mountain." And I just felt God just lifted this line off the page and says, "You spend enough time in Baltimore, it's time to go." And so that was my green light, you know, and I you know, immediately told Elaine, and then I phoned Arthur up and I said, "Arthur," because I was invited by Stars to come to Northern Ireland here to help, you know, and that kind of stuff. But I did say to Arthur, as he, you know, took me and Elaine out for breakfast at 6:30 in the morning, you know, to invite us, and I guess at 6:30 you might believe anything, you know, but and it was in some, you know, 24-hour Denny's, you know, in Martinsburg, West Virginia, you know, so but that was in September of '97. And what I said to Arthur at this time, and I never said this to anybody up to that point, I says, I have to hear from God. Prior to that, it was all about, "Oh God, I can do this for you. Here's my CV. What do you think? Can you fit me in?" You know, and, you know, looking for some sort of job opportunity with God, you know, and what I could do. And God was going, "I don't care what you could do. What I care about is what I can do through you." You know, and so I needed to then be built up with that over the next lot of months. And then God gives me this statement in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 6 and says, "Time to go." And so, again, the timing was right because I was in a job that I couldn't just actually walk out of, because I was a manager for a computer manager in a Bible college and seminary. And, you know, I was the department. So if I just gave those people 2 weeks notice or something like that, they would be, you know, running absolutely bonkers. You know, it's just like, so I then told my boss a few weeks after this, I says, "Look, God's called me to Northern Ireland." And he got that, he understood that, because we were all in Christian work, you know, and he says, "Well, when are you going to go?" You know, and I says, "Well, they won't have the funding in place until the autumn." You know, so this was, so, you know, when I spoke to my boss, that was February of '98. So there was a long number of months, you know, to go.
everything fell in place.
That worked. Now, the devil tried to throw a couple of obstacles in my road, you know, by, I ended up getting sick. I turned out to be glandular fever, but initially it was a big cancer scare with me, you know, and I was running around like a headless chicken trying to sort of tidy things up. But at my end, you know, moving country is a little more daunting than moving house. Okay, so you know, because you have immigration to deal with and all this carry on, you know, so it's all very
You're
interesting.
coming here to the troubles.
Well, '98 was a very, very difficult year in Northern Ireland, because you had the Oma bomb and you also had Banbridge bomb.
That's right.
which didn't really make the news much overseas. We heard about the Oma bomb, but nobody ever heard about the Banbridge bomb. That's because not too many people were actually killed in the Banbridge bomb, because some very astute policeman saw a car sitting kind of low in Banbridge town center, which looked a bit bomb-like. And I think there was what, a 10-minute clearance.
Yeah, they were beginning to put the people into where the bomb was.
Yeah.
He spotted it.
Yeah.
Sent them the other way. No, get out, go
Yeah.
the other way.
See,
Yeah,
but
so-
that opposite happened in Roma then. but
Yes,
back in
yes,
the-
Exactly, yeah, so people were sent down toward the
Yeah.
bomb.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Should have been Banbridge. That happened.
Can I just ask you
Yep.
personally, you moving from one country to another, complete
Yeah.
culture shock and everything aside,
Still shocked.
how did you feel? How did you feel going, you know, did you feel very vulnerable or? how did you feel?
Well, the nice thing was that I actually knew a lot of people here. You know, so I had family here because I was married to a Northern Irish girl. And plus, over 4 years, almost 4 years, I was getting to know people from Stars because they were coming over to the States to do meetings and see people and things. And so I knew nearly the whole staff by the time I got here. So, you know, so it wasn't hard. But the thing about moving here that was strange was we didn't know where to live. Now, Arthur had said, here's my house in Cullerbackie, and you can live there. Now, he said we could live there for a year, kind of set up shop and find our way. But eventually it was like, well, I think you probably should get out sooner rather than later, you know, so, but at least we had a car and we had a place to stay. So, and I remember the first meal that I had when we landed was we went up to Ballymena and went to McDonald's of all places. You know, and I thought, gosh, I can't even get away from America, you know, so, and, eating a Big Mac or a quarter pounder with cheese, you know, it's just like, please, come on. But anyway, so that was on Halloween of '98. So then the next day was my official start date. But then we were looking at where to go, and we were praying and saying, Lord, where do you want us to go? And so the reason we picked Banbridge was one, it was where Victor Maxwell was pastor at the time, because Victor had married us back in '94 when he was pastor in Templemore Hall in Belfast. And then in the intervening time, he went back to Brazil to do mission work, and then he came back and then he was here. So we knew that we would have an acceptance here, but it wasn't just sheerly because of Victor. We also just looked at the map and says, okay, Belfast here, Armagh's there, because I knew with the residential unit at Ballyards Castle, Armagh, Belfast, Middle, Banbridge. So I just kind of looked at it that way. And plus Banbridge is on the main Dublin road, handy to Dublin airport, and you know those kind of pragmatic sort of things. But you know, God opened up the door and brought us here, and this is where we've been.
Well, it was probably easier coming down to each speaking country, you know, if you had to go to a country where you have to learn a whole different language.
Well, you know,
But you have to learn a different language.
well, if that was the case. Now, I was prepared for that kind of thing because I thought in the early days I was going to end up in South America somewhere.
Ah,
You know, having to learn Spanish or Portuguese or whatever. You know.
I can't speak English.
Well, so yeah, yes, obviously it's handy being able to speak some kind of English like you all speak. But so right, let me just finish this up, and then that will be us's.
I haven't heard the message yet, right?
Yeah. So now the message is this, which is, and he said, meaning God, go and tell this people, keep on hearing but do not understand, keep on seeing but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return and be healed. Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, houses are without a man, the land is utterly desolate, and the Lord has removed men far away, and forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. but yet a tenth will be in it and will return and be for consuming, as a terebinth tree or as an oak whose stump remains when it is cut down, so the holy seed shall be its stump. Now, I'm not going to get into all whatever the message is about, but suffice to say, it's a pretty downbeat message. And one thing that the pastor said the other night, because he was actually reflecting upon this, was he said Isaiah, his entire career, which spanned maybe 70 years, was basically nearly talking into the air. Nobody wanted to listen.
Very discouraging.
That's hard going. But yet, when you look at the breadth of what Isaiah produced in terms of his 66 chapters, boy, I tell you, there's some wonderful stuff in there. You know, that where there's the fulfillment of prophecy in the Lord Jesus Christ and all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't for his time.
Not Moses.
So anyway, but I think, you know, humanly, if Isaiah heard this message first, and then God says, who shall I send? Who will go for us? I think Isaiah would have been going, the man that does that ain't here today, you know, so somebody else you need to speak to. But because Isaiah had such a convincing revelation of, again, vision of God, understanding of self, provision of remedy, see the call? Not a problem. So he knew, you know, he heard like you highlighted there, he heard the voice of the Lord.
Yeah.
So that, you know, the only response, reasonable response, rational response is to say, here am I, send me, open, and there it is.
That's known as the voice of the
Yeah,
Lord.
yeah. And that is a thing to pray, you know, and say, Lord, help me to hear your voice. You know, because there's a lot of voices around, and I'll just finish up with it, just talking about that, I'll just finish up with this story, and we've been sort of tailing on for an extra 20 minutes or so, but I remember we had this thing at that church one time in Virginia, and it was a hot summer's day, and it was one of these barbecue sort of things, and we had this this race where you had somebody sitting in a little red wagon, okay, and he was sitting and steering, and somebody was then behind them pushing the wagon, and so you had to go sort of like the length of the room here, and then you had to go around a hay bale, and the finishing line was then down that way. So it wasn't complicated in terms of the course, but guess what? The person sitting in the wagon and the guy pushing were both blindfolded. Now, the rest of the team had instructions to make sounds to indicate turning right, turning left, straight, push, stop, and all that kind of stuff. And it was all animal sounds. So it was like you had to meow like a cat to go left, you had to bark like a dog to go right, you had to go and tweet like a bird, you know, or something like this. And, you know, all funny animal stuff. And, but every team had different animal sounds that represented then different things. So somebody who's meowing like a cat for your team means go left, but they're meowing like a cat, which means go right. So I mean, it was smart. I mean, it's absolutely great. And so there's these two blindfolded people, and they're hearing stuff that is just completely, and I remember seeing this guy just pushing this guy, and there was a stream out yonder, and a bit of a steep bank, and he was just pushing this guy, and he was just, you know, and they just went boom, they just went straight into the stream, you know, and yes, it's hearing the voice, you know, so you know, one thing that God wasn't confusing. you know,
That's
so,
why you know the voice, but.
but God will never, ever, ever speak outside of what he says. So he'll never tell you something that is outside of the word of God. So that's why the Bible tells us to test those things. So, you know, you go back to when you're talking about the Bereans and all those kinds of things. You know, so the Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians because the Thessalonians were like, ah, sure, that sounds good, you know. But they were like, wait a minute, let's go and check out the Old Testament here and make sure these things are what they should be. So,
Whenever you got that message from verse 6, what it was.
yeah.
And then you took sick and those stomach blocks, did you doubt? Whenever you
Yes,
felt
there
like-
were times that I
That's
doubted.
nice.
Yes, I would be a liar if I said no, I didn't doubt. But
If you didn't hear the voice.
yes, but I kept on going back to the word of God and I said, but God has called me to do this. God has called me to do this, so I have to keep on going.
Devil puts stomach blocks
So,
there.
so if anything, it was going to delay me, but not stop me. So, anyway, so let's get this. Stop it.
Okay, any questions?